As we rebuild the pump today, we want you to understand that we have dismantled this and reassembled it numerous times, sanded some components and everything for ease of this presentation. Typically, on average, I've talked to some people that have done this in the field. It's going to average you about 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours to rebuild the pump, depending on whether it's a first or second time rebuild. But again, we have made this display come apart very easily. This will not be the case when you go to tear your pump apart. Hello, we're going to do a demonstration on how to rebuild a SIHI centrifugal pump today. My name is Chip McDaniel and this is Jimmy Wright.
Nice to meet you. We have actually went to school to learn how to rebuild one of these SIHI pumps. And the first start is this part here that my hand is on, the blue, is the actual impeller housing. This here, the gray, is the casing. This part here is the bracket bearing housing. And then the red part is the O-ring housing. And the first thing you're going to start out with is an 18mm wrench. You take these nuts loose. So as we do that,
as I said, this is a centrifugal pump. Works off centrifugal force. The pump on the suction side, over here, it has to be flooded with liquid. It's not a positive displacement pump or a geared pump that would suck into the pump. It has to have a positive head pressure going into the pump. Works off centrifugal force, so it has to have a fluid or liquid into it to fling it out, to force it out. Everything on this pump is metric. It was made, these are manufactured in Spain. Two companies came together, Siemens and Hinch. They shortened the name so they took on the name SIHI.
So as we take those nuts off, we'll be able to pull the casing out. You will be able to see the impeller. There is a lock washer and an impeller nut. We'll be able to you'll have to take this flat washer. This lock washer will be bent over the nut. You will have to take a flathead screwdriver or a chisel and a ball peen hammer and tap and flatten that washer out. Once the washer is flattened out, you'll be able to take the nut loose off the impeller. Then you'll be able to pull the lock washer off. There is a tooth on this lock washer. It fits into a groove on the impeller. You would take the pry bars, or if you have a pulley system that you would like to use, to actually pull the impeller off. So as you pry the impeller off, you'll look and see on the side of the impeller that you have a vane with the vane walls. All your pulley system or your pry bars, when you go to pry this off, need to be on this wall. Do not ply it onto the center because you can break or crack this impeller.
The impeller, the centrifugal pump we use here, the SIHI, the transfer fluid that flows through the pump is actually the liquid that lubricates the pump. So as you see here in the back side of the impeller, this is the suction side, this is the discharge side, but there's holes that go back in through the suction side to the back to force liquid through the pump to lubricate the lip seals.
So as we've taken off the impeller, next thing we'll want to do is to remove the key stop. You can use a set of side cutters to grab a hold and pry it out. Once you have pried out, then the next thing you'll want to do is to turn it around. You have 4 10mm. You'll need a 10mm wrench to take these bolts loose.
Jimmy has marked this pump before we took it apart in certain sections to remember where to put these things back. It's important to do so because we want the vent plug at a 45-degree angle here when we put everything back together.
So we'll be taking these 10mm bolts out, and this is also a bracket cover, and I have marked the top of it, so I will put it back in place.
The reason you mark the bearing cover is for the vent. We want to put that vent back down at the bottom. This pump You can't over grease the pump per se, but you can over pressurize it by using a pneumatic grease gun or oiler, and forcing that grease in there too rapidly and over grease it that way, over pressurize it that way, I say, and blow out the lip seal in the back of the bearing there.
So as we've taken those loose, take your rubber hammer, you're going to drive the shaft out. Once you drive the shaft out, you'll be able to pull it out.
Once that's open, you'll notice here in the back that that's where the grease comes in. It doesn't matter which direction you put the ball bearing in, but I would recommend putting it this side in first, because if you could notice there, if you put that in back in first, you're not going to get a lot of grease to the bearing initially. It'll take some time, but I would put it in this direction first when you reinstall the bearing onto your shaft.
So we'll take the bracket housing off, bracket bearing housing off. You will need a 17mm wrench to take these off.
And what we're doing here today is we're showing you how to do a complete rebuild. This is what we call a first-time rebuild kit. The first time you rebuild this pump, these are the items you're going to get. You're going to get an O-ring, shaft housing gasket, 7 lip seals, the ball bearing, and a cover gasket, and a tool, a measuring tool.
So once we get those bolts loose, you'll be able to take the bracket off. Next thing will be is your O-ring housing. This is a 5mm Allen. You'll either need a Allen wrench with a ball on the end, or be able to trim this one down to where it will fit. As you can tell, a regular one will not fit. So once you get that, you'll be able to take these loose.
And as I said a while ago, this is a first time kit. What Jimmy's taking apart is what you do the first time as well. But in the second time rebuild, you're also going to need all those 5 items and your carbon sleeve bearing and a new shaft. By the time you order the second time rebuild kit, your lip seals have worn grooves, too many grooves into the shaft to reseal off against the shaft, so you need a whole new shaft.
So as we take the O-ring housing off, the O-ring housing here is your actual O-ring seal that fits on here. You'll take the old one off and be able to put this one back in its place. You will also have your O-ring housing gasket, which is this part here. This gasket here, you're going to clean this out, and then this gasket will fit up in here. Make sure you clean it out. Once you get that part of it finished, or that part of it done there, this part here for a second time rebuild kit, this is your sleeve bearing. This is it here on the inside. You will have to take a chisel, go into this direction, put your chisel onto the lip of that sleeve bearing on the inside, and you're going to have to take a hammer and beat that thing out of there. You may break the inside, the carbon part of it, but that's fine. Every bit of that's got to come out. Now once you get that done and it's all taken out, you have a tapered end to the new one. You're going to take some grease and apply on the inside, and you're going to need to press this in. The tapered end goes in first, and you're going to press this back into place. You'll have to have a press to put it in. It's very important you use a press, because you want it to go straight back in there, not in an angle, because you can mess something up.
And if you try to beat that back in with a hammer, you're going to bust your carbon inside there, so you can't beat it back in there. It has to be pressed, as Jimmy said.
So the next thing we're going to do is work on the lip seals. There is 6 lip seals that go in here. These are your lip seals here. The lip seals that are in here, you will take your hammer and a flathead screwdriver. You will tap on them until you get it to tilt. When you get it to tilt down in there, you'll be able to take a hook, if you have one, and pull it up out of there. And each one of them's got to come out. Once you get every one of them out, you'll need to lubricate the inside. You have a metal side on these bearings or on these lip seals, and you have a flat or a rubber side on one side. Your first 5 go in with the metal side down. We do carry a tool that we sell here. This tool has a U on one side and an N on the other. The N means for a new shaft, and the U means for a used shaft. So if it's a first time rebuild kit, you will use the U side. If it's a second time rebuild kit, you will use the N side because you're using a new shaft. You will be able to put your lip seal onto the end. It holds it for you. You will be able to take your tool and a hammer, and you'll drive the lip seal down in there till you get to this groove, your last groove. That's where the first one goes. And then you'll come back, pull it out, put your next lip seal on, and you'll drive down to the next groove. And you'll work your way out of the tool till you get to the last groove. And once you get to the last one, the metal side goes up. All the other 5 go with the metal side down. This last one, the metal side is up. The reason for that is the oil does flow down the chamber, as Chip has already said, and as it flows down, these lip seals, with them turned with the metal side this way, will allow the oil to work its way down and to fill up this chamber with oil to help these lip seals to be lubricated. The last one will turn in the opposite direction, which holds the oil in this area so that it doesn't wash out your grease into your bearing. Once you have every one of those in place, the next thing will be is working on the shaft. You're going to take the shaft, you have a snap ring plier or snap ring. You can take your snap ring pliers.
And if you notice in the camera right now as Jimmy's doing that, the taper in the shaft, this is the area that allows the oil to travel down the shaft housing and to lubricate the lip seals here where it tapers back up.
So as you take the snap ring pliers and take the snap ring loose, you'll be able to pull it up this way. Now, as Chip was saying, this is tapered and it gets smaller up this way, so your bearing, you're actually going to set this bearing onto a vise. Just as my fingers are setting, you're not going to put the vise up against the shaft. You're actually going to just have the bearing sitting on those jaws. You're not going to have it tied up against the shaft. So this way you can take your rubber hammer and you're going to be able to drive this shaft back down through that bearing to get that bearing off.
And if you'll notice that there's a flat washer in here, it's a spacer. You need to make sure you keep that because that does not come with your second time rebuild kit. And that flat washer or spacer rests in this area. And this area is where your shaft will be sitting. Your bearing will be sitting on your shaft, and then your lip seals will go in this area here.
So once you have pressed a new bearing back on, you'll be able to put your snap ring back in place.
If you'll notice here on the lip seal housing, the flutes, again, the oil that flows through the pump is actually lubricating the pump as well. One of the many causes of failures in this pump is not venting the pump or contaminated oil getting inside the lip seals and causing it to cut. But again, overheating is the thing that we're trying to keep it from doing. We want this area to be cooled by the air around it. And this we want hot, of course, because we're running 350 to 400 degree oil, but we want that heat to dissipate over here where our lip seals are and our bearing and all that stuff rests.
Also too, you also want to take some emery cloth and clean the shaft up. You want it to look as shiny as this one is that's new. You want it to be as clean as it's smooth, so that also helps your lip seals. Well, once you have everything back together, your bearings on, your snap rings back in place, then we can go ahead and start putting everything back together. And as Chip has said already, that I have marked this so I can put it back in line together the way it was.
And before we get this going back on, this part right here, you want to take and remove this lip seal here. And remember again, like Jimmy said, watch the direction of the lip seal as you remove it, because this lip seal is turned with the metal side to the inside because we want to stop the flow of the oil from getting into the bearing and washing all the grease out of the bearing. Another thing that's important to remember is this pump is made to serve in several different applications. It's for industrial use. They change a few things about the pump, and they can operate it up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And the way they do that is they put a mechanical seal in here, and they pipe a couple of cooling lines over to a little small radiator and fan, and they have that pump constantly run coolant through the bearing housing here in the mechanical seal application. That's what this is for. And this, in the construction application that we use it in, where the temperatures don't go above 450 degrees, we don't have to have the coolant or the mechanical seal. So this acts as an indicator. When you start to see leakage coming out of this pretty steadily, you know it's about time to rebuild the pump because it's starting to leak. Never plug this hole. We have actually had instances where we've had customers plug this. It fills this area up with oil. The oil has to go somewhere. It pushes into the bearing housing, washes all the grease out of the bearing, and seizes and overheats, causes the pump to catch on fire. Always leave this area here open and unplugged for that reason.
Next step we'll do is actually start putting it back together. Like I said, you will be putting the O-ring housing back in here.
There. Yeah, sorry.
So we'll take and look for the mark side. This way I can put it back the way that it was.
It's very important to get these surfaces clean, free of any debris or anything, because you know, you've gone through the trouble of rebuilding the pump. You don't want to have it all go together and then leak. So clean those surface areas when you're putting this all back into place.
Next thing we're going to do is be able to put the bearing bracket back on. And we'll put these bolts back in. Remember, they are a 17 millimeter wrench. Once you're able to do that, get ready to slide the shaft back in.
Making sure to turn the vent for the bearing towards the bottom. That way your grease comes in at the top and the back, and out at the bottom and the front. Like I said, you can over-pressurize it, you can't over-grease it. It's recommended that you grease the pump every 1,000 hours of operation, or once a month, whichever is more frequent.
Remember, these bolts are the 10 millimeter wrench that you will use for them. Put this back in place. Once you have that back in, you'll be able to put the key stop back in place.
As I said, we're rebuilding a ZTND 4200 pump. These pumps come in several different sizes that we sell here at Heatec. Of those several different sizes, there's a 5200, a 65 250, a 32 125, different models. But basically, between those models all the way up to a 65 250, they're small, large. The only thing that changes about the rebuild kit is the casing housing. And if you were to rebuild the pump, you could use the same exact parts as we would on this one, except for the casing gasket will be different between a 32 125 and a 5200 and a 65 250. The shaft, the bearing, the lip seals, everything else is exactly the same.
You'll want to be able to, after we get the key stock on, we'll go ahead and put the impeller back on. Put the lock washer in place. And you can put the impeller nut on. You do not have to use a torque wrench on this impeller nut. You tighten down the nut as tight as you can get it. Then once you have it in place, you're gonna take this lock washer and you will take your small chisel or a flathead screwdriver and your small hammer, and you're gonna bend that washer back over that nut. Make sure it's locked in place. Then the next thing you're gonna wanna do is make sure this area is cleaned here for your casing gasket, which is this gasket Chip was talking about. Once you have it put in place, you'll be able to set the casing back in. And these are nuts are for 18mm wrench.
And you want to make sure you don't get this cocked in a bind. You want to kind of use a good torque pattern, crisscrossing torque pattern to mount that thing on there, because you don't want to get it out of balance there or out of true.
And as you're putting it back together, you can turn the shaft
And make sure that it's moving
right.
to ensure that you don't have it in a bind. So that's the rebuild of the pump. Now, as I said before, one of the big failures that causes a failure in this pump is contaminated oil. Because as you've seen, as we rebuilt the thing, the oil that lubricates it, or the oil that you're running through it, is actually the oil that's lubricating. It's running down this shaft housing, and again, these flutes are to help dissipate the heat and coming down here to lubricate the lip seals. Well, you've got to vent this pump because you rebuilt it, and you've got all new components in there. You need to, at this point in time, you need to grease the pump, grease your bearing, turn it a little bit, and you need to pull your vent plug out. This vent plug allows the oil to flow down the shaft housing. If you do not replace or vent this pump, you've got a giant air bubble right here. That air cannot go anywhere, so your oil is flowing through it, but it's not coming up here to lubricate your lip seals. That'll cause a premature failure, because what happens is the air in there will superheat, get super hot, crystallize your lip seals, and cause them to harden, and it'll cut grooves into that shaft, and you will see a pump failure within weeks or months, as opposed to years. Remove your remove your vent plug from your lip seal housing. Fill it up with some of the transfer oil that's running through the pump, and you'll see some lithium grease where you grease the lip seals when you install those and what have you. So you want to make sure that's filled up with some of your transfer oil. Turn the pump a little bit by hand. Try to work it a little bit so some of that oil can start traveling down through here. Then start the pump up. Let it run. Let it run until it starts to, you'll see air bubbles come out, some of that lithium grease come out, work its way out through over the shaft, lip seal housing, and it'll come down and it'll fill this little tray up. You can let it drip until it fills that up. And then check it and make sure there's no air still trapped in there, no air bubbles. And once that's done, with the pump running this whole time, then you put your vent plug back in and you're good to go. Because then you've got oil coming down through here, lubricating, and all the air that's trapped in there is out, and you're good to go. The second thing, the other thing that causes a pump failure in this pump is that being out of alignment. If you get this in a bind, as you saw when we put everything together, if you get the pump shaft in a bind, it's going to cause it to wear more on one side of the lip seal. So, and cut grooves into the shaft. So what we want to do is we want to do an alignment. And the way we do that is we align them here at the shop, but if you put one out in the field, you need to do a hot and cold alignment, because what happens is if you don't, when it's cold and you align it, everything's good, but then you got thermal expansion of your piping and the pump itself, so everything grows and contracts once it heats up and cools back down, so it changes some things. So you want to do a cold alignment first before you start it up. And the way we want to do that is we lay a straight edge across the face of the two flanges here, like your motor flange will be on this side, and this is your flange for your pump. Lay it across there until it's flat on both flanges and they're lined up and touching your straight edge. Do it from the top, turn it 90 degrees, do it again, 90 degrees, do it again. You may have to shim up either your pump or your motor. Typically it's your motor because your pump's in place with your piping. It's already mounted and everything. So you have to, shim up your motor and bring it up or down or whatever. And turn it 90 degrees. Just lay your straight edge on there again and check your alignment. Turn it again, check your alignment. And that's probably not going to be so far out, typically. But now from side to side, that's where you're gonna see your difference. That's where you're gonna have problems in the field most of the time if you order a pump skid from us. Because what happens is, we do an alignment here, but we ship it out in the field. It goes from a loading dock, somebody picks it up with a forklift, they take it to this loading dock and load it with another forklift. You get it at your plant, unload it with a whatever, and put it in place and pipe it in. It changes things. So that's why it's important to do this alignment in the field and make sure it's aligned from side to side as well. So you do this side, turn it 90 degrees, do it again, 90 degrees, again, until you get the thing aligned and true.
As Chip was saying earlier, that we did mark these, that I can put this pump back in place the way it was. And one of the reasons is because this vent plug. We want this vent plug not directly under here because it's harder to get to. And we don't want it no lower than what it is now. We want it at a 45-degree angle up, so that way you do fill this chamber up with oil. So it's very important that you do mark how you take this apart, that you can get that vent plug 45 degrees towards the top.
And we also recommend that you install these with a totally enclosed fan-cooled motor coupled to them that blows air across the motor to cool the motor and to help dissipate the heat around this shaft housing and the bearing. That'll help prolong the life of your pump. Well, that's all of our presentation. We hope you understand how to rebuild a SIHI pump a little better now.